So I wanted to look at a question which goes, I developed intense feelings for my therapist and eventually told her. We never really discussed it after that, and I eventually quit abruptly. Abruptly. It's been months and the feelings haven't faded. What else can I do to stop these feelings? Wow, what an interesting question. So thanks very much for that question. So let's attack this bit by bit. So I developed intense feelings. So many times I get a question for people. People say, can you be friends with your therapist after you've had therapy? And the answer is always absolutely not. And the reason I say this is because in order for therapy to work, in order for counseling or hypnotherapy or any type of therapy to work, the person is required to come present and become very vulnerable so that they can share their truth. And part of the reason why this works is because the therapist creates a really safe space, and it's kind of an artificial kind of phenomenon which cannot happen in any other circumstances. There are things that people tell their therapists that they would never tell their mum, their best friend, their sister, right? Emotions that they've experienced. There are things that people have gone through, like rape, which they would never tell anybody, but they would tell their therapist. And part of the reason is because there is this safe space which has been created by the therapist only to operate and act in that space. The issue that you have is that when you start interfering with that space after counseling and becoming friends, it becomes really confusing, and then you can start getting into what's called oversharing. I'm not going to complicate things and go into it, but my point being is you get into oversharing where people, basically the lines start getting blurred. Well, what is what is a friend? What isn't a friend? The person then can't really differentiate between who am I supposed to share with and what are people's boundaries and what are not my boundaries, right? It begins, the lines begin to like blur and they begin to fade. So it's really important and that you understand that a relationship can never ever develop between you and your therapist. That's one of the things. Second thing that I would share with you is that you have to understand that when you become a therapist, there is a code. If you're genuinely a professional therapist, there is a code of conduct that you have to operate by. That code of conduct says that the therapist cannot have a relationship, or certainly any kind of friendship or relationship, with the client, right? With the patient. And part of that is to protect the person, but also to protect the therapists themselves. And again, that goes back to lines being blurred and things being confused. And the issue that you have is if you don't help your as a therapist, if you don't help your client set appropriate boundaries, their life is going to start spiraling out of control very quickly, right? The person is going to start thinking, basically what you're going to have is codependency, right? The person is almost always going to need you. But the point of therapy is when you go to therapy and you go to a counselor or a mentor, their job is not to stay in your life. Their job is a bit like scaffolding. They're there to help you amend and correct and tweak whatever area that you need tweaking and correcting and refining, and then their job is to go away. Their job is not to be the foundation of your life, because that means anytime you have a problem, guess what you're going to do? You're going to go to your therapist. The whole point of therapy is to equip you so that you can solve your own problems, so that you can go out there and fight your own battles. I'm sure you've heard of that phrase which goes something on the lines of, if you give somebody a fish, they won't starve for a day. If you teach somebody how to fish, they'll never starve for the rest of their life, right? And that's essentially is what you want to do with clients. You know, there is particularly with when you start learning about how to become a counselor and a therapist, one of the things that they tell you in your code of conduct is that you have to stop thinking about clients as victims, right? You're not their savior. You're not there to be their to give them the solutions to all their problems. In fact, now let me give you some secrets. When you go to therapy, particularly talking therapy, when you are learning how to become a counselor, part of your training is that you're told you're not supposed to tell clients the answers to their problems. The person has to come to the answers themselves. They have to be able to discover the truth for themselves. Because if you tell me what my truth is, I can easily just take it on, right? And make it what you've just told me. And so I have to be very careful as a therapist not to put things in people's mouths, right? The people have to come to their own conclusions about what their truth is, about what they experience. And this goes back to things like being sued. If you tell something, for example, if you're doing something, there is something which is in, for example, hypnotherapy, which is called, God damn it, I can't even think of the word now. Basically, it's a method where you take the person back to their memories, okay, and the person is called paradoxical. God damn it! I think it's called paradoxical reframing or something like that. I can't remember the name of it now. But essentially what happens is, if somebody has experienced a trauma, you take the person backwards in and basically get them to relive the trauma, but not as children, but you get them to relive the trauma as adults, so that they can see the same experience now as adults, even though, because now they're stronger. So, for example, if you take the person back to that memories and you start saying things like, they start, for example, saying, you ask them, whilst they're in that space, you say to them, what can you see? Who is around you? What are they doing to you? And they're like, oh, this person's touching me. And you say to them, is this person touching you in your private parts? You now have a problem. Because if that person goes to court and says, my father or my brother or my uncle touched me in court, the issue that you have now is they're going to call you up as a therapist to testify to what you said. And here's the issue. You didn't actually mean to say that, but the person interpreted it in that way. And that's what it meant. The person has to come to their own conclusion about that. So that's really, really important for you to understand. But code of conduct is really important. So let me now tell you what you can do. The first thing that you can do is that I think it's really important to understand that you have to forget this. Okay? It's never going to happen. A proper therapist is never, ever going to have a relationship with you. So firstly, the first thing that I would do if I was you is I'd explore these emotions. What are these emotions teaching you about yourself? Do you have attachment? What was it about your therapist that made you develop this friendship? What did they say? Because here's now where it gets interesting. If they reciprocated the same emotional state that you're feeling, wouldn't they want to share it with you? And if was it that you were experiencing that and they weren't experiencing that? So why is it that you saw that but they didn't see that? Were you reading into something? Here's another question. Was that person making you think of somebody in your own family? Because what actually ends up happening is that when you go to therapy, and we're warned about this when you are training, you have to be really careful that the person does not see you as somebody in their life. Because you can go to therapy and your therapist reminds you of your brother, right? And they trigger you because you hated your brother. Or your therapist can remind you of an ex-lover because of things that they say or the way that they behave. And you actually end up liking them, thinking that they are who you previously had, when really it's just a professional relationship. So firstly, explore these emotions. Where are they coming from? What do they mean? Why are you experiencing them? And what do you want to do with them? Do you have codependency? Maybe previously you've got into relationships and part of the reason why they're dysfunctional is because you were loving somebody who wasn't reciprocating what you were experiencing. In other words, what I mean is you were so internalized in your emotional state that you weren't present to the moment. You weren't present to your partner's emotional state, what they were feeling, what you were projecting and giving them everything, but you weren't present to what they were giving you so that you can respond accordingly. So it was a one-way relationship where you were giving everything, but you weren't receiving anything from them, or what they were giving you weren't getting. So I'd explore that. Second thing that I would do is I would write a letter and apologize for what happened. Number one, this gives closure to the situation, because if you don't have, even every relationship, whether it be a marriage, a death, any kind of relationship, when there's an end, human beings love closure. We seek closure. We need to know, we need to have like a final, okay, it's done now. So what I would do is I'd write your therapist either a letter or an email, say, this is what happened, this is how I'm feeling, I've explored it, this is what I've been through, this is what I've been experiencing. I don't want you to reply. I just thought that I wanted to apologize, and in case you felt the same way, thank you so much for the sessions, blah. You will figure out what to say, but something on those lines. That way they have closure and you have closure on your own feelings as well. Secondly, or whatever number I'm on now, is that you can look at channeling these emotions. So anytime that we have what I call raw emotions which are not going to go away, shame, guilt, love, passion, rage, all of these high emotions, these emotions allow you to be able to do incredible things. So for example, you can now start journaling. You can now channel these into sharing, doing a diary. You can now start doing these into maybe even a workshop or yoga or a business project, or you can, whatever it may be for you, but you can figure out how to channel them. What do I mean by this? I'm sure you remember Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali Mike Tyson channeled all the anger that he had from his childhood into his boxing. It's what allowed him to become one of the greatest boxers of history. So you can channel those emotional feelings that you're having into something different, into a different project, right? Don't let them fade and let them linger. Use them to be able to move yourself forward. Use them, learn from them, do a course on them. Right? This is what I talk. One of the keys to healing and one of the keys to getting over stuff is to teach it to other people. Study the emotional state that you're going through, and then share a video on them. Write a blog about how you've overcome it and what you've experienced and how you've gone through it. Right? There are people and loads of other people who've gone through the same thing as you who would love to hear your insight on it. So share it with them. So those are kind of the few ideas that I would give you. I don't know whether they're useful for you or not, but thank you very much for the question, and I hope it's added some value to the quality of your life. Cheers. Bye for now.